Hey there, self-care warriors. Welcome back to Self-Care Haven. Today I wanted to talk to you about some of the gaslighting effect that's happening in response to the spreading of awareness about these disorders, about psychopathy, about sociopaths, about malignant narcissists. As we continue to speak out, there's also been a very violent tragedy in Colorado that has again brought this topic to the forefront of psychopathy and what happens when a covert wolf in sheep's clothing is able to get away with their mask for so long. Is the phenomenon where the charismatic mask of the narcissistic or sociopathic predator has convinced society that they are somehow normal, that they are just someone who needs to be taken care of, they're just someone with issues, but they're not someone who lacks empathy or conscience. And this is one of the biggest misconceptions when it comes to these types of predators in our society. So if you've heard about the horrific case of Shannan and Chris Watts, Shannan was pregnant and she had 2 little kids, and her husband basically murdered her and their 2 kids and dumped the kids in oil wells. And he blame shifted at first and said that actually he had seen Shannan strangle the kids and that's why he killed her. Now this is a type of man who nobody would ever suspect would murder his wife and children and unborn child, and it's very similar to the Scott Peterson case where we had a covert wolf in sheep's clothing. And this type of murder really brings out the fact that society has very little knowledge about psychopathy. If you watched any of Shane Dawson's recent documentary on Jake Paul, he was actually asking if Jake Paul was a sociopath, and he interviewed a therapist who has a YouTube channel, Katie Morton. I'm sure you've seen some of her videos, and they did an excellent interview together about what it means to be a sociopath, whether there would be certain celebrities and their actions that would fit into this criteria. She basically went over the DSM with him and did a really great job of explaining how covert these manipulators can be and how dangerous they are to society. Now the reaction to that was incredibly surprising to me, because years ago, for example, when one of my articles had gone viral, 20 diversion tactics that highly manipulative narcissists, sociopaths, and psychopaths use. There was definitely backlash because there were a lot of people who were saying that that article stigmatized people with narcissistic personality disorder or antisocial personality disorder. However, I thought that we were kind of beyond that backlash at this point, because now that society is learning more about malignant narcissism, they know exactly what a psychopath is, they know what a sociopath is. So all of these comments, berating Katie Morton and Shane Dawson for dramatizing psychopathy and making it seem like all of these people are these horrible monsters, when in fact, according to these comments, they're just people like us. I was baffled. Either these people have never actually met an actual sociopath, either they're enablers of sociopaths, or they're sociopaths themselves exercising the pity ploy. I don't think anybody in that comment section understands how deeply unprofessional it would be for a therapist to not speak out against the dangers of psychopathy and being a sociopath. And there was nothing in that video, I watched it many times, that would even be remotely inaccurate. I think that she did a fantastic job. I think that her reactions were very human. I think that her reactions of disgust at the manipulative tactics that these people use to terrorize and traumatize and fly under the radar and even manipulate in groups where they are supposed to be an authority figure was on point, and I didn't see anything wrong with it. However, it seems that the general population, and these might be younger teens who are watching these videos who have no idea about the actual manipulative tactics. They might not have had experiences yet with sociopaths, which is a good thing. However, I think it's extremely dangerous because this kind of backlash is setting back a lot of the efforts and the knowledge and the information that has been out there for the past few years about the dangerous aspects of narcissists, sociopaths, and psychopaths. Now, Are there vulnerable narcissists out there who may not be as dangerous? Of course there might be. Narcissism exists on a spectrum. But what you have to understand is that a lot of the survivors in communities that speak about psychopathy have experienced the worst of the worst. They've experienced the malignant end of the spectrum, right? Now, Chris and Shannan Watts was in a very extreme version of what survivors of psychopathy go through every day, right? This was an extreme, violent, and tragic end, but it doesn't mean that the psychopaths that have entered through our lives aren't capable of that. Because remember, a lot of people thought that Chris Watts had snapped. They started blaming the victim. They started asking, what could have driven him to do this to her? And it was despicable. I mean, this kind of victim shaming and victim blaming that's coming up over this case is frankly deplorable, and it shows how far we have to go as a society to understand the danger of sociopaths. Because if we have professionals who are commenting under Shane Dawson and Katie Morton's video saying that I'm a professional and I don't think it's professional to speak about these disorders in my opinion, in a very accurate way in which they did, and they were berating Katie and Shane for even putting out this documentary and putting out this interview that I think will help a lot of people and bring sociopathy and psychopathy into the mainstream a lot more. It's really important that we remember that a personality disorder such as antisocial personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder, in which a person does not seek treatment and continues to abuse, control, manipulate, and violate others, is not the same as a mental illness like schizophrenia or some sort of psychosis. Because in those circumstances where someone is depressed or anxious or is experiencing an episode of psychosis, they have absolutely no control, right? They have no control over what's happening to them. In narcissistic personality disorder and antisocial personality disorder, it has been proven by research, it has been shown by the experts themselves that these toxic types have cognitive empathy. They're able to distinguish from right and wrong. The only difference is that they do not care, and they do not have that kind of remorse. They do not have that type of conscience that would allow them to even care. And instead of gaining treatment or learning new skills to not pose a harm to society, what they choose to do instead is to continue to violate. And I don't think it's stigmatizing, I don't think it's demonizing to speak the truth about that, because there have been many people who have been affected by somebody else's narcissism and their inability to have a conscience. And when we talk about stigma and demonizing people, we also have to remember that the people who suffer the most are the victims of sociopaths and narcissists. They are the ones who go through complex PTSD. They're the ones who go through PTSD. They're the ones who go through trauma. They're the ones who have to rebuild their lives. They're the ones who have been affected. So for you to just comment and further gaslight people who have already suffered so much and deny the fact that these disorders can be potentially dangerous is the unprofessional thing to do. I think it's very professional for all mental health professionals, all advocates, all writers who write in this field to speak about the dangers. Because if someone really wanted to get help, they wouldn't be going online trying to defend their abusive behavior. They would own up to it, they would seek treatment, and yes, they can spread awareness about their disorder. I mean, I don't see anything wrong with putting out a video that talks about your disorder. What I do see wrong is that you're invalidating millions of survivors in the world who have experienced the malignant end of this disorder from people who have terrorized them time and time again. And that's the problem here. The problem isn't that you're spreading awareness about these disorders or speaking your own truth if you happen to have antisocial personality disorder or narcissistic personality disorder. The problem is that you're gaslighting and further invalidating people who have experienced this firsthand, who have experienced people who do not get treatment. And intrinsic to these disorders is an inability and unwillingness to get treatment, right? And I think that's why professionals who are well informed, like Katie Morton, about these disorders have every right to speak about the dangers, because she is saving lives. I mean, we're all saving lives when we speak about this type of violence. We're all saving a life, because without that kind of validation, without that kind of grounding ourselves into reality, we would never even imagine what it's like to meet someone without a conscience. We would just assume that they're a normal person with issues. We would assume that, you know, they're not deliberately hurting us. We would assume that it was our fault. We would assume that the abuse was our problem, that we were imagining it, that we were too oversensitive, that we were obsessed, that we were overreacting. And this is what our abusers want us to think. So if you run into documentaries like that, and you see all these comments, just remember to ground yourself in the reality of this abuse. Read articles by therapists about narcissistic abuse. Make sure you share these articles. Share videos by people who've been there. Share videos by other professionals. Share videos like that interview with Shane Dawson and Katie Morton about sociopaths and psychopaths, and continue to spread awareness, because it's really important that we continue to speak the truth. It's really important to remember that this younger generation is growing up at a time where it's much easier to meet a narcissist and sociopath and psychopath than ever before, right? Because we have online dating apps right now where narcissists and sociopaths and psychopaths, they're using these dating apps as hunting grounds for victims. And it's so much easier nowadays for these toxic types to get supply, and for a person from the younger generation to meet and encounter narcissists, psychopaths, and sociopaths in their daily lives. Honestly, it's so easy nowadays to run into someone. A lot of people were also doubting the idea that 1 in 25 people are sociopaths, and they were trying to gaslight everyone in the comment section saying, oh, that can't possibly be true. Where did you get that statistic from? She got that statistic from Dr. Martha Stout, who is the writer of The Sociopath Next Door. Yes, a doctor, a professional who has written about this topic at length, who is an expert on these disorders, has written this book and has said that statistic. And I don't doubt that statistic at all. I think a lot of us underestimate the number of sociopaths that are in our society, who have no conscience, who are walking around. I'm not saying that we have to label everyone as a sociopath or narcissist. I think that it's very clear when someone is that way. I think it's very clear when someone engages in destructive, harmful behavior chronically throughout their lives. I think it is clear when someone is a pathological liar. I think it is clear when someone is gaslighting you. I think it is clear when someone is abusing you financially, verbally, emotionally, psychologically, and even physically and sexually. I think it is clear, and I think as a society we need to stand up for the survivors rather than the perpetrators. It's really about time, so that we don't have to gaslight victims who are very much in similar situations as Shannan Watts was when she was in a relationship with Chris, and she was obviously overcompensating on social media, or maybe she really did feel like she had a happy life. We'll never really know what happened behind closed doors, but what we do know is that she and her children met a very tragic end at the hands of a perpetrator, at the hands of a psychopathic or sociopathic perpetrator like Chris Watts. And that is the extreme violent version of what happens when you are in a relationship with a psychopath, sociopath, or malignant narcissist. But at the same time, none of us really know what our perpetrators were capable of, because thankfully we either escaped or, you know, they moved on to a different victim, but they are all still capable of it. Because would you ever really trust someone without empathy or conscience not to do that to you? I mean, it all depends on their own agenda. If they feel like it's more convenient to murder you, they might. And that's something we have to keep in mind. Even if they didn't show violent tendencies before, someone without empathy, someone without conscience, without the ability to respect the rights of others, and who has abused you chronically time and time again, is a dangerous person. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with speaking the truth about that. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to share this video, please do so to spread awareness. And if you have questions or comments about the Shane Dawson documentary, please leave them below. If you have comments on the Chris Watts and Shannan Watts case, please feel free to leave those below as well. I just wanted to make this video because these are some of the topics that have been running through my mind lately, and I really wanted to continue to spread awareness, continue to address the backlash against mental health professionals or advocates or survivors who speak out, and continue to speak out about these really legitimate dangers of these toxic personalities. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you haven't done so yet, please do subscribe to my channel. I do try to put out videos every week, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Until next time, take care. Be sure to check out my #1 best-selling book, Becoming the Narcissist Worst Nightmare, How to Devalue and Discard the Narcissist While Supplying Yourself, a #1 bestseller in personality disorders. Also be sure to check out my book Power, Surviving and Thriving After Narcissistic Abuse, a #1 bestseller in applied psychology.